feather, stiff as a board. Light as a 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 feather, stiff as a board.
Hello and welcome to the Final Girls podcast. I'm Anna Bukitska, co-founder of the Final Girls. We're a UK-based film collective exploring the intersections of horror film and feminism. We curate and organize events, screenings and programs, and now also a podcast. To coincide with our screening series called Here Be Witches, exploring all things witchcraft on screen throughout November, we're diving into films, both horror and not so horror, that feature witches at the center. We'll be publishing episodes every week, each centered on a different film or TV show, with a special guest joining me to dive deeper into its themes, its legacy, and the way witches are represented in it. To kick off this series, I sat down with writer Ione Gamble, the founder and editor-in-chief of Polyester Zine, as well as the host of the Polyester podcast. Ione and I sat down to discuss The Craft, the 1996 teen horror sleepover classic centered on four outcast teenage girls at a Los Angeles high school who pursue witchcraft for their own gain. The trio of misfits, led by Nancy Downs, played here by Fairuza Balk, with Rochelle, that's Rachel True, and Bonnie, future Scream Queen Neve Campbell, are joined by newcomer Sarah, played by Robin Tooney. And together they discover and evolve their abilities, taking back power into their hands and taking revenge on those who hurt them.
To the other kids at St. Bernard Academy, they were the girls who didn't belong.
Whatever you do, stay away from them.
Why?
They're witches.
But after years of being on the outside,
Why'd you lie about me?
I don't want to go out with you again. Please, stop begging. It's pathetic.
four girls are about to discover the dark side.
You ever heard of invoking the spirit?
Black magic.
We can make things happen. I mean, this is it. This is real.
Ione, thanks so much for being here. And
Anytime.
I think you've got the most coveted slot in this podcast series.
Oh, really?
Yeah, everybody wanted to talk about The Craft. It's the one movie that every single person that I approached for the podcast was like, is The Craft taken already?
Oh, no way. Well, I'm happy that I got it then. Got in early.
So when did you first see The Craft?
I was thinking about this, and I think I first saw it probably when I was like 14 or 15. So I used to collect VHSs. Well, collect, lol. That's like a bit of an overstretch, but you know, buy VHSs. I suppose it was like the easiest way to watch films.
That's collecting.
Makes me sound like really old, but this was only like 10 years ago, so...
The millennial timeline is very fast.
So I think I must have watched it around when I was like 14 or 15 just by myself. And I think I'd seen a lot of like screenshots of it across the internet, and maybe that's why I picked it up when I saw it out. I'm not really sure. I can't remember, but it was all over Tumblr, so I must have like seen it there somehow, because I used to like seek out films a lot that I'd see on Tumblr specifically.
What was your first impression? Do you remember what your reaction to it was as a 14-year-old girl? Because that's such a perfect age to watch The Craft.
It is, yeah. I think I was like a bit in awe of it, especially, well, I don't know, the film really seems like kind of split into two for me in my mind. Like the first half where they are all great friends, and then the second half where it goes all absolutely batshit mental. And when I re-watched it, I think I kind of had the same impression of it as I do now, which is like, the second half kind not ruins it because it's great, but like throws it all off a bit for me, and I'm like but I was definitely very like impressed and inspired by it when I was a teenager, and it definitely like fed into a lot of the other things I was interested in and looking at the time. I definitely grew up with like a group of friends that were kind of, you know, vaguely interested in witchcraft on some level, and I was very interested in, you know, horror films and like especially women in horror films, so I definitely liked it.
And what about rewatching it last night?
So when I rewatched it, I forgot like so much about it, and I was definitely picking up on like the dynamics between the girls more than my first watch, I think. But I mean, it holds up. Like, it is pretty batshit crazy. It feels like you're watching a weird fever dream. Like, it definitely, because I really love teen films. It definitely doesn't really follow. Like, it is very traditionally a teen film in a lot of ways, but in other ways, it's just like, yeah, it just goes absolutely off the rails about halfway through and into crazy horror.
When you rewatched it for this, what struck you about it? Kind of not just the first half and the second half being so different, but actually, do you think it was sort of weirdly prescient in a way, where it kind of touched on topics that are very much still part of the cultural conversation right now?
Yeah, definitely. I found Nancy's character very interesting, and I think it's particularly interesting about her specifically how across the internet and with teen girls she has sort of become somewhat of like an icon, but she is horrible, and I kind of love that about her. I think they take it too far in the film when she ends up institutionalized. It seems like a bit unnecessary. I mean, I'm like, she tried to kill a lot of people, but it's fine.
Nancy's such an interesting character because she is positioned as the villain, but she's also very clearly sort of a victim of circumstance as well, and she's so relatable in the fact that she's wants so much. Like, even if you think about all of the things that the other girls in the coven ask of Manon, who's their kind of god that they worship and then they want to invoke, they want beauty, or they want love, or they want acceptance, and Nancy wants pure power. She wants to be able to do anything she wants, and power manifested through magic or money, or kind of the freedom of being able to move around and not be kind of constrained by her environment.
And I think that's definitely something that is still very much like frowned upon. If you are someone who is marginalized and you want power, that's seen as a bad thing, or like a thing that makes you questionable as a person if you want power, especially if you are a femme. And that's obviously why she is so kind of reviled in the film by many people. But it did strike me as like funny, I suppose, how her and what's the other main character called? I'm so bad with names. Sarah. Like, they basically end up being the same thing. Like, they're pitted together as like good versus evil, and she's like a good witch and Nancy's a bad witch, but they do the same thing in the end, especially at the end when Sarah knocks the tree down and nearly hurts the other two girls. Like, that is classic mean girl behavior. Classic.
I mean, actually, if you think about it, this is such a perfect blueprint for a mean girl teen movie trope, because there's 3 of them, and even if we go to Mean Girls from 2004, there's 3 of them, and then a new girl who's sort of pure and naturally beautiful, naturally talented, kind of in an effortless sort of way,
like, corrupted.
Yeah, and she gets kind of absorbed and corrupted by this trio, but also she's the one who ends up becoming even worse than the queen bee. So in Mean Girls, it's Katie who starts outsmarting and outwitting Regina George. So she becomes almost worse than Regina herself, and in this way Sarah also becomes almost worse than Nancy in a sense.
Yeah, totally. And I think the power dynamics and the moral dynamics of the film are kind of a lot all over the place and a bit of a mess.
Go on.
Like, when I know the actress's name is Rachel, but I don't know the character's name because I'm so
Rochelle.
bad at Rochelle. Okay. When she gets all of the racist bullies' hair to fall out, but then she starts feeling bad about it. Like, why feel bad? That girl is still a cunt.
I mean, actually Rochelle's motivations are probably in a way the most sincere ones. Well, they're all sort of sincere, but she just wants to be at peace because she's been actively bullied by this racist girl at her school and kind of being prevented from living her life and doing what she wants to do and going to swim practice and whatnot. So her kind of motivation is righteous revenge in a way.
I think hers definitely makes the most sense. Like, there's a clear narrative, whereas like with Nancy's it kind of jumps around a lot. You don't really know why she wants what she does until there's the one scene where her stepfather dies. And with the other girl with the skin condition on her back, like that Bonnie, that kind of makes sense, but they don't. But then like, I was watching it with a friend last night, and she was like, oh, if that happened to me, I'd wear a backless dress to school the next day, which obviously you would, but then she comes in a t-shirt. And I know the whole point is still that, like, oh, she's got loads of confidence now, but it's like, they should have taken that further. And when they're like, oh, she's a bitch, she doesn't actually seem that bad. Maybe I'm just evil.
Well, she does come in with that sort of, confident stride. She comes in late into the class, and she's all of a sudden kind of very sassy and everything.
It's not played out enough though.
Although then at one point she does become very sexually aggressive, so she kind of compliments and tries to, pat the ass of a guy who's kind of walking past, and kind of is all over the place, kind of with her very explicit sexuality, which in a sense is like, that was the thing maybe that she was repressing because she felt uncomfortable because of her skin condition. But in a way, that seems to be an internal thing. Like, that was always there, but she needed the confidence boost of being able to, say, not shy away from showing the skin that she wanted to show, because that's her natural personality kind of coming through.
Yeah, totally. And I do find it quite, like, funny that they only start getting moral compasses when it starts, like, going on the turn for them. Like, they're like, oh, wait, maybe we can't have it all. Which I suppose is, like, a life lesson in some ways, because they are obviously the underdogs in terms of, like, the school hierarchy system and other things, and then when they start to regain that power, they're very quickly, like, put back in line, which is kind of a shame as well.
Yeah, that's kind of the thing that was always disappointing for me about Nancy. I mean, she is positioned as the villain, but actually, in terms of them being friends with each other, when I've rewatched the film over the years, and especially as an adult, I see her as being quite kind.
Yeah.
Now, if you consider in the story, right? So Sarah comes in. The first guy she meets is Chris Hooker, who is fuckboy number one in the school, and played by Skeet Ulrich, who then went on to famously kind of play Billy in the first Scream film. And now
Riverdale.
Yes, hot dad number one in Riverdale.
Oh yeah.
So she kind of falls for Chris, but it's very clearly from the start stated that Nancy used to have a thing with Chris, and then she very quickly brushes it off. So Nancy gives her the intel. She's like, watch out for this guy, he is not to be trusted. Sarah still falls for him despite her new friend being sort of his ex, which is, potentially a big no-no. But still, yeah, but Nancy not just allows her, but she warns her, she's kind, she encourages her, she supports her when she's brokenhearted, and then she avenges her after he assaults her as well. So she's quite a good friend. She's very protective of her girls in that friendship group, and then she's the one punished when her ambition gets the better of her.
Yeah, I think Nancy is, like, quite a classic example of, she's just not to be contained into what we consider, like, a good person to be. Like, she has no sort of sense of, like, social cues. Like, she makes weird noises and speaks in, like, these weird tongues that don't really make much sense. Like, when you watch it, it does just make not much sense at all. And she's just, like, this girl that's very clearly unhinged in some way or another, is very, like, she's very, like, puts everything to the forefront as to how she is, and isn't scared to be, like, a weirdo. But that's ultimately what is vilified about her, which I think is, like, kind of a weird.
I remember kind of the thing that always sticks is the aesthetic of the film as well. And just kind of how fearless Nancy especially is, because even when they're first introduced, right, in that sort of walking down a corridor montage, she's the one who's fully in that 90s teen.
The most out of all of them. Like, they kind of get a bit more like Nancy as the film goes on, and then pull back really quickly. It's like, commit.
Yeah, because all of them are quite sort of vanilla schoolgirl outfits, and she's just full on crucifix necklace, black lipstick. Everything is modified. Everything has this sort of teen gothy aesthetic to it. She's got a noose in her locker. She's out there and completely fearless and unashamed of who she is. And everyone sort of steps into line with her once they start really engaging with their powers. But as you say, then they pull back, which was always sort of disappointing for me. And then she gets punished as well for being sort of the fearless weirdo.
Yeah, and I don't think that. It's weird how there's power struggles, like, within the friendship group as well. Like, they first line up with Nancy, but then they obviously want Sarah to be their, like, leader or whatever, and that's when the two are pitted at odds with each other. Whereas I think it's a much stronger story and like a much stronger message when they are just kind of all like witching about in the woods and like are a unified team. But obviously that is largely not how it goes in school, especially with teenage girls. There's so much infighting and stuff like that. But Nancy's definitely like over vilified, maybe. I mean, we've been able to find the like humanity and relate to her over like many years of rewatching and seeing this character played out, whereas like, yeah, I'm sure when it first came out, when people watched it, they were just like, she's a bitch or something.
But also, do you think that, I think there's a lot of it that comes down to the performance by Fairuza Balk as well. You know, she's so committed to it, full on. It's like every single facial expression, not just her makeup and stance and how she walks, how she talks to everyone else. She's doing so much acting with a capital A in the background, isn't she?
Yeah, she's totally committed to being like 100% an outsider, which is like a great thing, but it also means that certain other things don't line up, like her relationship with Chris. Why were they ever even together? Like, they are complete polar opposites, and she is like the friend you would want to have but feel a bit embarrassed of, or like potentially people would feel embarrassed of. You know, she will like literally go and fight to the death for you, but she doesn't do it in a way that's like that nice. I feel like you would want her as a friend, but you would be like, I don't know. I don't fully condone her actions, even though I do. I am that friend.
And it's interesting you pointed out before that kind of Rochelle and Bonnie sort of gravitate towards the person that they feel is the most powerful. So kind of when Nancy is the de facto leader of the weirdos, let's say, they're fully behind her. But then when they see that Sarah might be more naturally powerful than Nancy is, they sort of come running back to her. What do you think kind of that says about the power dynamic of kind of girl gangs?
I think it definitely says that like a lot of people like to rally behind one person, and it says like a lot about popularity and things like that. And I don't know though, because both of those girls, they have like their own innate power, and you can see it in the choices that they make, that they want to direct their magic towards like everything. I think they have like a lot of heart as characters, both of them. So it seems doesn't make logical sense that they'd want to rally behind one specific person, but like everyone needs a leader and everyone likes someone to like look up to and stuff like that. And I think you definitely do that throughout your whole life, not just as a teenage girl. You always want to gravitate towards people that you think are impressive or you think that are cool or like whatever. And obviously Nancy is like the archetypal kind of like cool but least cool person in the world, but as in for like weird girl, she is the coolest person in the world.
She's kind of the poster child for weird girls, isn't she?
Definitely.
Yeah.
But then she is obviously viewed as morally reprehensible. So then they go to Sarah, who's like more palatable, has like a kinder way of using magic or like speaking, even though I would not necessarily agree with that, because I think she has it in her to be bad as well. But she's kind of like the softer option. Do you know what I mean?
And let's talk a little bit about kind of how magic is portrayed in here, because it's something that seems to be a bit divided between sort of natural witches, like Sarah is presented as a natural witch who's just is born with powers through her mother, versus the rest of the girls who have to go through rituals and learn spells and do all of this work in order to gain a little bit of the natural power that Sarah has. So kind of what do you think about how these two brands of magic are presented in the film?
Well, it's kind of like being naturally gifted versus having to try really, really hard at something, isn't it? Like people, you know, what is it like? Yeah, I was a star pupil as a kid, Twitter, being like, now I'm a mess, whatever. That's who Sarah would be. And Nancy and everyone have to work for it. And I don't think that, you know, maybe a sense of entitlement comes more from being born good at something, and I think it takes commitment to have to try and have to, you know, you have to be more committed and you have to be more passionate about something to try it and really get to know it. Whereas if it comes easily to you, then you know you probably won't craft your skill as much or aim to. And I think that's like very, very applicable to the real world. And in terms of how it portrays witchcraft in particular, I kind of like the fact that it, you know, the fact that the three girls need a fourth. It's like you need other people to be able to achieve your full potential, and you need to work with other people, you need to have like friendships with other people and all of this, which I think is really good messaging for real life. Yeah.
And do you think kind of the rituals that they do, kind of almost when they're playing around, you know, there's so many sleepovers in this film. You know, they do all of these tiny spells on each other. There's a really tender moment where Nancy's trying to heal Bonnie's scars, kind of in front of the fire. And then obviously there's the light as a feather, stiff as a board ritual where they lift up Rochelle. And I think every single teenage girl of a certain age has recreated that
100%.
at some point. Yeah. So kind of what do you think is the lasting impression of those images?
I think it definitely would inspire people to, you know, try those things out, but also to get together like with your friends and to make little rituals in your everyday life, like to empower each other through, you know, acts of kindness and acts of friendship, and through the act of doing things collaboratively as well, because they can't, you know, when Sarah tries to curse Nancy and then Nancy immediately knows and is like, don't do that again, and it doesn't work because she does it by herself, and like Nancy has the power of 3. And I think that definitely would, you know, inspired me to kind of pick things up with my friends, and like the whole teenage bedroom culture is something I'm extremely interested in generally, like across films, and I think adding magic to that is just like all the more delicious.
Let's pick up on that. Kind of what do you think about the teenage bedrooms and the way that they're presented in these films? Because there's some of the most fascinating spaces throughout the films, because we get a real insight into each one of the characters. Yeah,
I think it's really interesting, like the way as well that it shows, you know, like class between the girls, and like Nancy living in a trailer and then Sarah living in a fucking massive house in like the Hollywood Hills. What does her dad do? I kept asking myself this. And yeah, like I think that really speaks to also how those two protagonists are like portrayed, and as you picked up on earlier, the way that Nancy is hungry for power through a lacking of having it, and a lack of like autonomy over her situation. And when they get put in the massive flat, when she gets the like payout from her stepdad's death, and they have the most ridiculous things like that jukebox and stuff, and Sarah's kind of like dismissive of it because obviously she has all this wealth already. And I think that's really interesting. But also Sarah doesn't like decorate her bedroom or anything, does she? Like at the end it's really plain and just like a weird manor house.
Yeah, she's much more kind of committed to the photograph of her mom. So she's much more kind of emotion driven than driven by wealth or the space. But maybe that's just because she's always had access to that. It's never been a worry, whether it's the absence of any sort of support systems or, you know, a space of her own that's not invaded by kind of her mom's abusive boyfriend is something that Nancy, we're led to believe, has never really had.
And I also think that's probably why Sarah is like not as committed to the coven, because, you know, she has like a supportive father, and like her mum is gone, but she feels connected to her mother, so she has like these roots, whereas Nancy just doesn't really have those roots in the same way, so seeks it in other friendships.
And kind of one of the key invisible figures in a way is the film is Manon, who is this goddess figure that they worship, which is, you know, entirely fictional, I believe, and kind of created for the film. But there's a beautiful kind of point where Nancy, as a real devout believer, goes on and says Manon is everything. You know, if God and the devil were playing football, he'd be the field and the football pitch and the grass and the sky and everything else.
You guys, maybe he'll really listen now. Who? Manon.
Oh, what's that? That's like God? No, man invented God. This is older than that. Do you guys worship the devil? It's like God and the devil. I mean, it's everything. It's the trees, it's the ground, it's the rocks, it's the moon. It's everything. It's nature. No. If God and the devil were playing football, Manon would be the stadium that they played on. It would be the sun that shone down on them.
What do you think about that portrayal of this made-up deity?
I mean, I do think it, like, just from my own personal viewing, I don't like it. Like, I think it's a shame that they have to kind of pray to like an overlord or like value one specific kind of system to be so powerful over them. Like, I think it's more interesting if they conjure up the power within themselves, or like through like the environment that they then channel through themselves, like as feminine people. I think that's more interesting than like a deity god who is, like, they say him all throughout the film, don't they?
They
so
do.
It's probably a him. Probably you're a him. I think that is like a bit disappointing. So I think I kind of ignored it. I was like, I just don't want to know. So now. Like, I think it's much more interesting to think about them having power over each other and through each other, then it's a overlord allowing them it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, because it is kind of, they're still, even as these kind of power hungry and then eventually powerful young witches, they're still worshipping a deity in some way, who is the kind of the figure that's responsible for gifting them the powers, except in the case of Sarah, who is presented from the beginning as being a natural born witch.
And it feels kind of like not at odds, but you know, because there's the woman who works in the witchcraft shop and she's the one that teaches them all of it. Like that would have been a much more natural power figure to have. Like I don't think it was necessary to then have a deity like above her, because she already presents that kind of like motherly, like mentorship,
fountain of knowledge. But they very aggressively sort of dismiss her and reject her in the first half of the film when they first visit the shop, and Sarah's the only one who sort of starts listening to her. And then, you know, Nancy, once she gets a bit of money, kind of quite aggressively buys a book about invoking the spirit, and when she's warned kind of about the peril of that, she just sort of throws money at her and says, you know, I've got money now and I can buy this and I can afford this. You can't teach me anything that I don't know.
Yeah, I think Nancy definitely has like a bullish attitude towards things, but I also think that's like a very teen girl thing to do, isn't it? Like you're unlikely to listen to older role models, really. I think that's, you get a real appreciation for that maybe when you're in your early 20s or like a bit of an older teen. Like when you're at school, you just want to teach yourself everything, and you think that you have the power to like unlock all of life's lessons, which is untrue.
Is it? Especially with Nancy, because she is being rejected constantly on a daily basis in her school, and also does not have a very good home environment either. So kind of she has to develop this really protective outer shell.
Definitely. And like obviously would be hard to trust people in that situation as well. And why would you like trust a woman that owns a witchcraft shop? Doesn't seem like the most upstanding person.
I mean, they're all witches.
It's
so.
True. It's true.
But let's talk a little bit about Chris Hooker. What did you think of Chris when you first watched the film as a teenage girl, and what did you think of him now as an adult woman? I
mean, I think when I first watched it, I can't even remember him being in it. So like that is generally the retention I have for straight white men. And like they just kind of gloss over me. I just do not acknowledge their existence most of the time. But upon watching it back like yesterday, I mean, he's just an archetypal fuckboy, as you said already, like an absolute cock. And it seems weird that Sarah is so like taken in by him in the beginning. And a moment that I thought was really nice is when, you know, they're casting the initial spells and she has the picture of him and says like, oh, I want him to love me or whatever. It was nice that the other girls didn't dismiss her. Like they were like, oh, that's lame or whatever they said, but they weren't like, you're a weirdo for saying that. Like it was kind of in a friendly way, because at home I was definitely thinking, what the hell are you doing? He just like said you're a bad fuck.
Yeah, like he essentially, she rejected him and he slut shamed her when they hadn't even done anything more than a kiss, which felt quite forced anyway. But also when I was rewatching it last night, and this is so flippant, I almost feel bad about it, I kept thinking, where did you get that picture?
Oh my god, I know, same. I was like, already, girl, that is like quick.
I was like,
she moves quick.
Who had a looking straight to camera picture of Chris Hooker that you found and stole, or maybe more embarrassingly, asked someone to borrow to burn in a witch ritual?
I mean, I respect it. That's a level of commitment that I really respect.
But yeah, he's so clearly presented as a prick.
And I also think it's interesting that, you know, she puts the love spell on him, and it's kind of presented that that's because he's acting that way because of the spell. But it's not that far from how men behave in real life, like coming to her house, like incessantly contacting her, begging to take her out, and then obviously eventually forcing himself upon her. Like men do not know boundaries, and like love spell or not. And then when he first approached her and was like, oh, do you hate me? Well, it's like, you're the one that said all that shit and you haven't apologized or anything.
He doesn't actually apologize to her at any point or acknowledge anything.
No.
But what I found was interesting kind of rewatching is that actually the spell just makes him a more exaggerated version of himself. He was already a fuckboy prick, but he was more sly about it and kind of very confident in himself and not really caring about anyone. The only thing he cared about was his own image, and he'd kind of put down girls around him to make sure to maintain his image as sort of this, you know, seductive womanizer basically in high school. Okay, calm down.
We're just chatting shit about 15-year-old boy.
Yeah, calm down. But then, you know, when he goes into this love spell, he becomes just as relentless and kind of knows no boundaries, like you say, but
and isn't
also
really kind. Like,
no,
they kind of present his actions as if it is kind of like kind or doting, but it's so transparent that they aren't his actual motivations. He's just incessant because she's not that reciprocal.
Yeah, and like he just keeps to the point where he tries to force himself upon her, but you can almost, well, the movie really leads us to gives us enough information to deduce that he would do this even if he wasn't under a love spell, essentially.
Yeah.
And it was so poignant kind of how kind of the slut shaming machine worked so quickly against Sarah as well. She was a new girl in school. She went out on one date with this
and
dude.
It was like by lunchtime.
Yeah, and by lunchtime everybody had this opinion of her. But I always keep wondering, like, it's so beautifully portrayed how toxic that is, because she's instantly sort of marred by this kind of accusation, but at the same time he's the one who's been at the school for a long time, and he's clearly done this before to other girls.
So many girls.
Yeah, and Nancy being kind of the only one that we know of that was also sort of stigmatized because of this.
Yeah,
which I thought was kind of such an interesting portrayal of kind of the double standards around female and male sexuality, and kind of, you know, even if they did have sex, why is that suddenly a reason to shun Sarah?
Yeah, definitely. And also like the hierarchy between girls, because the shot directly after she's told is a lot of other women like laughing at her and pointing at her. So the ways in which like girls are so easy to turn on each other in high school, I think, is like an interesting narrative that runs through that film, whether
absolutely.
It's like the popular girls and the witches, or like the witches to the witches, or, you know, there's so many threads to it.
Oh, absolutely. And even kind of, you know, Rochelle's tormentor is this girl who's in her swim team as well. And yeah, she's a racist piece of shit, essentially. But it's so interesting that she takes such pleasure in torturing another student, another girl in her class.
I do find it hilarious as well how the bully at no point just shaves her head. Like, she lets all the hair just gradually fall out for like weeks.
But it also kind of shows kind of how important vanity is for teenage girls, like the way they look and what that says about them in the sort of the hierarchy of high school.
Oh yeah, totally, because one of the first comments that she says towards Rochelle is about her hair looking like a pube, and so then her hair is attacked. And I think it is those kind of like small comments that really hurt when you're growing up, isn't it? Like, someone might just think they're being funny and only like marginally offensive, but they're the things that you remember for like the rest of your life, essentially.
Yeah, and Rochelle is kind of such an iconic figure with kind of on-screen witches in many regards, but also within kind of the dynamic of the four witches of the craft as well.
Yeah, definitely. I think she is a really good character.
Can you talk a little bit about where do you see the influence of the craft most in other pop culture? There's a long gestating remake / sequel coming up at some point in the near future.
Is it ever going to happen?
I really hope not.
Don't do it.
I don't want anything to sully this film.
Yeah.
But where do you kind of see its influence the most?
I think definitely, I mean, Nancy's outfit, the like PVC jacket, you can just like walk down Kingsland High Street, which we're near, and you will see like 50 girls, like walk into St. Martin's and you will see every single one of them in a PVC jacket. And she really did kind of, you know, set the tone for what a teen witch looks like, much more than like Sabrina did or anything, because Sabrina was iconic in her own way, 90s iteration, but didn't really have that, like, she didn't have a tangible darkness around the way she dressed.
Sabrina was the most vanilla witch ever.
Exactly. And I think a lot of people were especially teenage girls were kind of hungry to see that represented, like the same with Enid and Ghost World and like many other iconic teen girl characters. They want kind of, yeah, like a bastion of weirdness to be able to look up to. And even, you know, like the hair is like iconic dyke haircut, you know, the chokers, the black lipstick, the nail, I mean the whole look, like tartan skirts. It's so like pervasive now still in culture, especially like, I don't know, the last 5 years. So many people are wearing those clothes, and I think that's something that has definitely can be traced straight back to the craft. And I also think it's interesting of the way in which they use witchcraft, you know, kind of like going to the shop and buying their candles and buying their books. That is something that a lot more millennial women are doing, like buying into the consumerist side of witchcraft, as opposed to like the more holistic or like maybe whatever people are actually burning ritual candles and burning sage, which is like problematic, I think. But I think that is an interesting thing that the craft kind of picked up on very early.
Kind of to round off, when we even mention witches on screen, or even when we started working on this project, or even on this podcast, the first film that always everybody comes up with is The Craft. Do you think, you know, even from finding it in a used VHS store, or renting it on DVD in a you know, RRP Blockbuster or something like that, why do you think kind of people keep navigating towards it? Do you think it's also kind of continued to be in everyone's mind because of internet and meme culture as well? Like, there's so many GIFs, so many images. It's so kind of pervasive, not just in its style and its aesthetic and kind of a clothes or an interior design type of way, but also kind of in those snippets that are now circulating everywhere.
Yeah, I mean, I saw like the We Are the Weirdos Mr. GIF probably like 200 times before I was 16, probably more. And like, I think a lot of it is down to Fruza Balk and Nancy's character. Seeing her out of context like can make sense in a meme setting, or like watching the whole film, you get such a complicated portrayal of like female anger and female power and all of these things that aren't really shown very well on film, period, especially if that character is a teenage girl. Even in other teen movies, you know, what we consider to be like complicated female characters can still be quite two-dimensional, and we just seek the meaning out of it. But Nancy and the other girls in the craft all have different layers to them, different layers to their pain, different layers to their power. And I think that's, if you're feeling misunderstood yourself, whether you're a teenager or an adult, I mean, it does empower you to watch them like fuck people up who are mean to them.
I mean, I love it. I mean, it's even that kind of part of the film where they sort of walk down from the bus to go off into the woods to do their rituals, and the bus driver, quite, you know, with good intentions, sort of says, you know, watch out for the weirdos, girls. And it's such an iconic line when she says, we're the weirdos, mister. It's like, actually nothing can hurt us because we're the ones wielding the power.
And I think Nancy's like indifference to men is something that I find so interesting, and definitely not portrayed in teen films. Like, obviously not indifference, because she has like real force, anger towards them, but as in,
I'm sorry.
He's sorry. Oh, he's sorry. He's sorry. He's sorry. He's sorry. He's sorry. He's sorry. Sorry, Mom.
At no point does her character try to like really play up to men, or like get a boyfriend, or like whatever, you know, like she isn't trying to make herself more sexually appealing. She exudes it anyway, but her thing isn't to be you know, like beautiful or whatever. She is very indifferent and angry towards men, which I think is quite rare to see in a film as well. You often see like teen girls crying over boys, or like distraught, or trying to pander to their attention, which this film also includes, but Nancy just doesn't give a fuck, which I think is quite interesting.
Oh, you're so right, especially kind of in the contrast with Sarah, who, you know, she wants many things, but the main object of her obsession is Chris Hooker.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas Nancy, who's had him and has also been hurt by him, is sort of like, no, I don't care about that.
Yeah,
I just want to be free, be powerful, do whatever I want to do on my terms.
and she also doesn't seem too upset about the lies that he spread about her. Like, she uses it as like a cautionary tale, but she doesn't seem that it's kind of affected the way that she operates or the person that she is, which I think is quite impressive.
Yeah, and she's so fiercely independent as well. Like, she could literally, and in a way, you know, maybe this is a protective layer of her personality as well, but she does seem to be, you know, she doesn't really need anyone to exist. She's good by herself.
Yeah.
And witchcraft seems to be the route that she has found to solve a lot of the kind of external issues that she has to deal with.
Yeah, and I think, you know, it turns out to be an unhealthy coping mechanism, but it's not the worst of them in the grand scheme of things.
What do you think about the ending?
I mean, I think the ending is disappointing. I would have much preferred to see like Nancy live her life, even if it was in some twisted, fucked up way that's not like in an institution. I mean, I kind of like the layers of history that is with the institutionalized ending, as that is like likely would have happened to her if she was, you know, 60 years prior. Like, that does happen to women that are, you know, not conforming to how we should consider women to be. So, but I did think it was a bit of like a cheap ending. It didn't really give you that much payoff, and it was like a shame equally that Nancy ended up institutionalized, and also that Sarah was so like cutting to the girls when they come and try and make amends. I just want everyone to be friends, basically.
I mean, I guess that leaves the door open for a sequel.
True.
With Nancy Downs. Justice for Nancy.
I would love to see that. But
yeah.
I think I'd just like to see a teen portrayal of witchcraft that is kind of, you know, it calls upon the craft but is something different. I feel like you could, I mean, Scream Queens was shit, wasn't it? I don't like Scream Queens.
Season 1 was good.
I don't like it. I don't know. I'd like to see something that isn't so self-referential and like tongue-in-cheek. I'd like to see like a earnest portrayal of witchcraft, I suppose, that like doesn't, because I feel like Scream Queens takes itself too seriously when it's trying to be funny, and it's just too much. Like, I'd like to see something in the middle. Maybe Nancy can make a special appearance in the sequel. Yeah, if it ever happens. I don't think it will. It's been shelved for like ages now. Oh god, I think it is happening, but I just either want them to not touch the original characters or to bring some of them back in kind of good roles. Yeah, definitely, I agree. Like, I think there is space for it, but we should be seeking out, you know, like new narratives of teen witchiness. We don't have to rely on the old ones to make something good. Amazing. Thank you. Thanks so much. Thanks for having me. Always happy to. You got the opening slot. I'm so honoured. Like, actually am. Don't know how I blagged this one, but great news. No, it's amazing. Where can we find your work, and do you have anything coming up that we can plug? I release 4 new zines on Halloween. I run a zine called Polyester. You can find it at Polyester Zine on everything. Me at Ione Gamble, spelled IONE and then Gamble. So released 4 new scenes. Next week will be like the last episode of the Polyester podcast for the season, so definitely listen to that. And I think that's it. Follow me, lol. Bye.
And I ask for the ability to not hate those who hate me, especially racist pieces of bleach blonde shit like Laura Lizzie. Right up.
I drink of my sisters, and I ask to love myself more and to allow myself to be loved more by others. Especially Chris Fucker. I know it's pathetic.
Definitely pathetic.
I drink of my sisters, and I take into myself the power to be beautiful, outside as well as in.
I drink of my sisters, and I take into myself all the power of Manon. That's all? Blessed be. Blessed be. Blessed be.